an independent editorial analysis of Japan's defense posture and security policy.
The gradual retirement of the P-3C Orion fleet from the active roster of the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force represents more than a mere life cycle transition of an airframe. It signifies a fundamental shift in the management of national defense assets. It transforms what was once solely an operational capability into a potential instrument of strategic diplomacy. As the Kawasaki P-1 jet steadily assumes the primary maritime patrol responsibilities, the surplus inventory of P-3C aircraft constitutes a latent capital reserve. These assets are currently preserved in various states of readiness at facilities like Atsugi and Kanoya. The disposition of these assets is not merely a logistical matter of disposal or storage. It is a complex equation, one that involves industrial capacity, regional security architecture, and the legal frameworks governing defense exports. This transition offers a distinct opportunity to examine how legacy hardware can be repurposed to serve contemporary strategic objectives. Specifically, the security of sea lanes extending far beyond Japanese territorial waters. At the core of this strategic calculation lies the changing nature of the threat environment in the Indo-Pacific. This is particularly relevant along the critical waterways of the South China Sea and the Luzon Strait. For decades, the P-3C served as the primary sensor node for Japan. It was designed to detect and track Soviet and later Russian and Chinese subsurface threats. The introduction of the P-1, with its superior speed, altitude, and indigenous sensor suite, reflects a doctrinal evolution toward faster reaction times and broader area coverage. However, the P-3C remains a potent platform. It is characterized by significant endurance and a payload capacity that far exceeds the light maritime patrol aircraft currently operated by Southeast Asian nations. There is a distinct disparity between the heavy four-engine anti-submarine warfare capability of a P-3C and the twin-engine, short-range platforms common in the region. This creates a capability gap, and it is a gap that Tokyo appears well-positioned to address. By transferring these robust platforms to partners such as the Philippines or potentially Vietnam, Japan could effectively externalize a portion of its surveillance requirements. This would create a remote sensor network, one that enhances domain awareness in areas critical to Japanese maritime commerce, without requiring the direct, constitutionally sensitive deployment of JMSDF assets. From a systems perspective, however, the transfer of such complex machinery introduces significant logistical and financial friction. A P-3C Orion is not a standalone unit. It is the visible apex of a deep support pyramid requiring specialized maintenance, substantial fuel supplies, and highly trained air crews. The operational cost, often estimated in the range of thousands of US dollars per flight hour, presents a formidable fiscal challenge for developing economies. This economic reality suggests that any successful transfer program cannot be limited to the airframes alone. It necessitates a comprehensive support package. This is likely funded through the newly established Official Security Assistance Framework. This integration of hardware aid with financial support for sustainment highlights the shift in Japanese defense policy. It moves from a passive stance on equipment transfers to a proactive, life cycle-oriented approach. It implies that the efficacy of the strategy depends less on the number of aircraft transferred and more on the establishment of a sustainable maintenance ecosystem in the recipient nation. This could potentially involve Japanese technical personnel under agreements like the Reciprocal Access Agreement. The industrial implications of this potential transfer are equally profound, particularly for Kawasaki Heavy Industries and the broader network of domestic subcontractors. Maintaining the operational viability of P-3C fleets abroad could open new revenue streams for the Japanese defense industry. It marks a transition from a monopsony model focused solely on the Ministry of Defense to a service export model. Yet, this introduces a trade-off regarding technology security. The avionics and acoustic processing suites within the JMSDF P-3C fleet contain proprietary algorithms and sensor libraries. These are sensitive national secrets. Preparing these aircraft for export involves a delicate process of sanitization. It requires removing classified components while attempting to retain enough capability to ensure the aircraft remains operationally relevant for the recipient. If the sanitization is too aggressive, the platform loses its comparative advantage over cheaper commercial derivatives. If it is too permissive, it risks compromising the acoustic signatures and tactical data that safeguard the Japanese home islands. Furthermore, the integration of these legacy platforms into the force structures of Southeast Asian partners demands an examination of their absorption capacity. The transition from operating light transport derivatives to managing a complex four-engine maritime patrol aircraft requires a cultural and organizational leap, specifically in maintenance discipline and mission planning. The effectiveness of the P-3C as a remote shield for Japan relies on the recipient capability to generate sorties consistently. If the recipient Navy or Air Force cannot maintain the operational availability of the fleet due to technical complexity or funding shortfall, the strategic value of the transfer collapses. This potential point of failure highlights the necessity for a long-term institutional commitment from Tokyo. It must extend beyond the initial handover ceremony to include multi-year training rotations and supply chain guarantees. It suggests that the true export is not the aircraft itself, but the institutional doctrine of high readiness and rigorous maintenance that characterizes the JMSDF. The strategic utility of placing P-3C aircraft in the Philippines or Vietnam also serves a specific function in the anti-access and area denial calculation. A permanent presence of long-range anti-submarine warfare capable aircraft operating from bases in Luzon or along the Vietnamese coast complicates the calculus for adversary submarine commanders, particularly those attempting to transit from the South China Sea to the deep waters of the Pacific. Even if these transferred aircraft operate with older sensor suites, their ability to deploy sonobuoys and conduct persistent patrols forces opposing subsurface units to operate more cautiously. This degrades their operational tempo. For Japan, this imposes a cost on potential adversaries at a minimal risk to its own personnel. It effectively extends the Japanese surveillance perimeter thousands of kilometers southwards. It utilizes the geographical advantages of partner nations to monitor the choke points that control access to the trade routes upon which the Japanese economy depends. Ultimately, the trajectory of the P-3C fleet from domestic guardians to exported assets illustrates the intricate relationship between technology life cycles and grand strategy. The program serves as a litmus test for the ability of Japan to navigate the complexities of defense diplomacy. It involves balancing the desire to empower regional partners against the hard constraints of budget, technology security, and logistical feasibility. It reveals a defense posture that is becoming increasingly systemic, one that looks beyond the immediate defense of the archipelago to the cultivation of a favorable security architecture across the Indo-Pacific. The success or failure of this initiative will not be measured by the number of aircraft delivered, but rather by the operational availability rates of these fleets 5 or 10 years hence, and by the quality of the intelligence data that flows back into the regional security network. This evolution suggests a future where Japanese defense strategy is defined as much by the capacity to build partner competence as by the kinetic capabilities of its own forces.